الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون أوصيكم ونفسي بتقوى الله تعالى فإن الله تعالى مع المتقين وبعد. The Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام, he said, لا إيمان لمن لا أمانة له ولا دين لمن لا عهد له. He said عليه الصلاة والسلام, the one who has no amana, no sense of responsibility and trustworthiness, has no iman, and the one who has no ability to fulfill an agreement has no deen. And our deen is based upon our ability to fulfill an agreement. We have an agreement with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Those of us born into Islam or born into an agreement that we have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and those of us that accept Islam later on in our lives, whether young or old, we have an agreement with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When a person says, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, that I testify there is nothing worthy of worship except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what does that mean? It's an agreement with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a covenant with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It means I will not take partners with Him, whether physical partners, whether partners of the nafs, the soul, desires, whether material, such as wealth, desire of the stomach and the private part, and so on and so forth. I will not put anything in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what it means. And when a person says, وَأَشْهَدُ أَنَّ مُحَمَّدًا عَبْدُهُ وَرَسُولُهُ, I testify that Muhammad alayhi salam is his final messenger and his servant, his slave. This person is entering into an agreement to follow the framework that was delivered to mankind by the Prophet alayhi salam. Regardless of whether he likes elements of it or he does not like elements of it, he agrees to follow it. That's the covenant. That's the agreement. And that's what we will be held responsible for on Yawm al-Qiyamah. It's not that I can pick and choose what I like from the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the framework of the Prophet alayhi salam, It's not that I can ask why. It's not that I should interpretate things in accordance to how I would like to practice my deen. No, it's to practice it as delivered by the Prophet ﷺ, as revealed to him by the angel Jibreel ﷺ, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. That's the covenant, the agreement, the ahd that we all have. And that's what we will be held accountable for on Yawm al-Qiyamah. Amanah, responsibility, ability to fulfill, to be trustworthy. It's a foundational, core element of our deen. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said, أول ما تفقدون من دينكم الأمانة وآخره الصلاة. He said the first thing that you will lose from your deen is amanah, trustworthiness. The first thing that we will lose as a people, as an ummah, trustworthiness. Where a man will say something and he doesn't fulfill it. A man cannot be trusted. Quraysh, who are not Muslims, could be trusted with the women and the children of the Muslims in a time of war. In a time of war, the Muslims knew that the enemy of Islam at that time, Quraysh, would not harm their women or their children. Because there was an understanding that that's a low that a person does not sink to, regardless the animosity and enmity held between two groups. Today, we have those from amongst our community whom cannot be trusted with their own children, let alone the children of others. And we should not be pleased to be in such a state, nor should we remain quiet about being in such a state. Amanah, responsibility, trust. The Prophet ﷺ was known by Quraysh as what? As-Sadiqul Amin, prior to revelation. And they could not call him a liar, except that they knew they were lying in calling him a liar. He was trusted to the extent that he left Ali radiallahu ta'ala anh behind when he immigrated to Medina to give back that which was given to him in trust by the enemies of Islam. Those who wanted to kill the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ still wanted to give their goods back to them, as a people I mean. And he left Ali behind to do so, because he was entrusted with the property of others and he knew the responsibility of entrustment. The Prophet ﷺ gave back that which belonged to those who drove him out of his own land. Yet today, within our ummah, we have those that will not give back that which they owe to their Muslim brother. Whether money, whether property, whether dignity and honor. And that, again, is not something that we should be pleased with, nor should we allow that to become something prevalent amongst our community. We have those amongst us, for example, and of course I do not mean an individual here, I mean amongst us as an ummah, that will say it's okay to lie to someone if they're not a Muslim. It's okay to steal from someone if they're not a Muslim. It's okay to deceive someone if they're not a Muslim. Our leader and master, the Prophet ﷺ, did not do such a thing and was entrusted by those who took him as a political, at least political, enemy at that time. The Prophet ﷺ, he said that every single person is ra'. He said, كُلُّكُمْ رَاعٍ وَمَسْئُولٌ عَنْ رَعِيَّتِهِ. Every single person is responsible for his flock and will be questioned about his flock on Yawm al-Qiyamah. Responsibility is not simply on the shoulders of a political leader, a community leader. Responsibility is not tied to being known. Responsibility is tied to every single one of us. The man is responsible for his wife and his children. And some today may not like to hear that. Some today don't want to hear that they're responsible for their wives. And some women don't want to hear that their men are responsible for them. But again, that's the framework given to us by Islam. الرجال قوامون على النساء.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed responsibility in the hand of the man. And it's not something to be taken lightly. It doesn't mean that a person can command and so on and so forth. It means on Yawm al-Qiyamah, every single man will stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, question about his wife and his children. If the man leaves his wife and leaves his children to the sheep, or to the wolves, I'll say, like sheep, Yawm al-Qiyamah, he will stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If the man marries a woman and has children with her and decides he's not happy with her anymore, gets up and leaves, on Yawm al-Qiyamah, he will be questioned about his wife and about his children. Just as the women will be questioned about not giving the responsibility the man has to him and preventing him from carrying out his duties. It's an amanah, responsibility, a trust, a covenant, which precedes everything else. The society that we live in, the cultural elements of our deen that we may have adopted are irrelevant when it comes to the framework of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We will be questioned based upon that framework. When one of the leaders of Quraysh was asked about the Prophet ﷺ, Abu Sufyan, by the leader of the Romans at the time, he was asked about what the Prophet commands you to do. He said that he orders us bis-salah, was-sidq, wal-afaf, wal-wafa'i bil-ahd, wa ada' al-amanah. He said that he orders us to pray, and he commands us to be truthful, and he instructs us to carry out and to fulfill that which we agree to. Covenants that we owe, agreements that we've entered into, contracts, whether verbal or written, such as buying and selling, such as loaning and borrowing, and so on and so forth. And he mentioned, he instructs us to fulfill that which we're responsible for. And Hirqal, the leader of the Romans at the time in the Middle Eastern region, he said to him, he has asked you to carry out that which is upon the prophets. This is prophecy. Responsibility, fulfilling trusts that we have been given is a key part of our deen. It's not something we should take lightly. And it's something which unfortunately today we are losing. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said, أَوَّلُ مَا تَفْقِدُونَ مِنْ دِينِكُمْ al-Amanah. The first thing that will be taken away from you is trust. Trust. Does this mean that we're coming to the end? Allah knows best. If that's the case, then we need to be on guard. And we need to make sure that we are not from those that cannot be trusted. And there are many areas that we need to fulfill trust given to us. It's not something to be taken lightly. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what did he say? إِذْ قَالَ رَبُّكَ لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he said that he is going to place, prior to our creation, or at the time of our creation, a Khalifa on this earth. And what is a Khalifa? A Khalifa is someone that basically deputizes. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala informed the angels when creating us, our father Adam, that he was going to make Adam Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's deputy on this earth, his vicegerent on this earth, responsible for practicing the framework that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala deemed fit for his creation. That's a responsibility. And we are the inheritors of that responsibility. It's not something that we can decide whether or not we want to partake in. It's not something I can wake up in the morning and ask myself, do I want to contribute towards the betterment of man with Islam? No, it's a responsibility. Unless there are enough people fulfilling that responsibility on this earth today, we are all questionable for it. It's something which at the very least it's fard kifa'i. And potentially on some individuals it's fardu aini. It's an individual responsibility for some. And it's a collective responsibility for most. A person whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given the ability to teach, in a time of ignorance, it becomes an individual responsibility upon that person to teach. He will be questioned if he doesn't teach. A person who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given financial capabilities. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given him wealth. It's not a choice. It's an individual responsibility upon that person to use his wealth and contribute toward the betterment of man through the implementation of Islam. The one whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given political position, it's his individual responsibility to use his position in order to contribute towards the betterment of our people, man, with Islam. Every single one of us need to look at ourselves and ask, what responsibility do I have as an individual? Because we are living in a time where mankind is in need of Islam. We are living in a time where mankind is losing what it means to be man. And soon, if we continue upon the current trajectory that we're on, we will not even be able to call ourselves animals. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us a framework, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us a responsibility. And it's not something that we have a choice about, especially for the young. Those who are young and intellectually capable, physically capable, financially capable, they need to put that which they have toward the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This life is temporary. The akhirah is permanent. The responsibility that we have is not going to disappear. And we have so much wealth amongst us of intelligence, of financial power, of physical ability, of individuals who can speak well, individuals who know how to connect to others. We have to use that which we have in order to serve the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's our responsibility. It's our amanah. It's what we're going to be questioned about as a collective on Yawm al-Qiyamah. For those that are young especially, take it into consideration. And for those who have children, if we're raising our children to be concerned only with this life, we're raising our children to be doctors and engineers and teachers and so on and so forth, so that they can have a nice home and a nice car and some loving children, then we can only blame ourselves when our situation gets worse. If we're not raising our children with the responsibility of Islam, as has been said so many times from this minbar, the likes of Salah ad-Deen had a mother. The likes of Al-Ghazali had a father. The Prophet ﷺ, when we read his seerah, look at who contributed toward his life. Of course, he received revelation, but the community behind him also contributed to his character. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose Quraysh to be the tribe that gave birth to the Prophet ﷺ. We have to think about our future in the way that we raise our children. And for those that are young and they've reached an age of responsibility, they can make the decisions and ask the question, am I taking care of my responsibilities? What responsibilities do I have? Because we only have one chance. And when the angel of death visits us, we don't have another option. We're going with him, and we're going to be questioned about that which we left behind. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله وحده وصلوات ربي وسلامه على أشرف الأنبياء ومن تبعه وبعد. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, كلكم راع ومسؤول عن رعيته. Every single one of us, we have a flock that we're responsible for. For some, the only flock they're responsible for is perhaps their own self. For others, their family members. For others, their local community. And I'm talking about individually responsible for. But collectively, as mentioned, we are responsible for the welfare of our own ummah. And it's very easy to point fingers. It's very easy to blame others. It's very easy to look at circumstances that we don't have control over and blame them for our shortcomings. But it's difficult to look at ourselves and blame ourselves and make the changes that we need to make within ourselves. And until we do that, what excuse do we have for blaming others? If I can't control that which I have control over, why should I complain about that which I have no control over? I have control over what I allow into the home when I'm teaching my children. I have control over that which my children consume. I have control over the education that my children receives, and so on and so forth. We need to take responsibility, and there are certain responsibilities that we need to pay special attention to. Number one, the responsibility of parenthood. It's not acceptable for a man to abandon his children. It's unacceptable. It's haram. And that man may live a lavish life, but on Yawm al-Qiyamah he will be questioned about those he left behind. If a man has the strength to marry and impregnate, he should have the strength to raise and nurture his children. And if a man finds that he has problems with his wife after having children with her, he cannot suddenly decide she's not good for me anymore. No, you had children with her, you need to take responsibility for your children. One of the biggest problems we have in our community today, unfortunately, fathers that are not involved with their children. Absent fathers. And an absent father is not necessarily a father that is not physically present. Also, the father who's not emotionally present. The father who's not mentally present. The father who doesn't involve himself with the affairs of his children. Doesn't conversate with his children. Doesn't show love and affection to his children. It's a responsibility. It's not a choice. When I raise my children right, I'm not doing something praiseworthy. I'm doing something which is wajib upon me. It's something compulsory upon myself. Likewise, the responsibility to our parents. Today, we live in a society where the culture has become, when the parents reach a certain age, you hand them over to the government. Allow the government to take responsibility for them. That's not our culture. Our culture is our parents come before everyone else. Our parents, in fact, come before our own children. Our parents come before our wives. Our parents should come before our husbands, for our sisters. It's a responsibility, one that we will be questioned about on Yawm al-Qiyamah. Responsibility and the Amanah that we have with our neighbors. With our neighbors. Our neighbors have rights upon us. Our neighbors have the right to be treated fairly, to be treated kindly. What fairer treatment is there than giving Islam to a non-Muslim neighbor? That's the fairest of treatment. Would I like for myself to be running into a pit of fire and no one to warn me? Of course not. Then I should not like that for fellow men. If I have a neighbor who is non-Muslim, I need to prioritize bringing Islam to them. I need to make excuses for their ignorant behavior. And I need to see myself as a teacher of the framework of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this individual. We have the Amanah, the responsibility for the self, education, which requires some introspection and some reflection. Am I educated in my Deen? If not, I need to take it upon myself to educate myself. And today we live in a time where there is no excuse. A person does not need to leave their home. A person does not need to leave their bed. And they can seek education through the devices that we all carry. A scroll of the thumb and a click of the finger, and a person can receive education directly. What excuse is there? If I cannot read the Quran, I'm responsible for that once I reach my adult age. If I don't know how to pray, I'm responsible for that. If I don't know how to perform wudu properly, I'm responsible for that, and so on and so forth. The responsibility of fulfilling agreements that we've engaged in. If I have engaged in a transactional agreement with someone, I've agreed to purchase something from someone, and I owe them money, and I have the financial ability to pay that person back. If I do not pay them back, I'm sinning. I'm sinning because I am breaking an agreement with that person. And previously, under the courts of Islam, if a person complained to a judge about someone who was not paying them back and had the financial ability to do so, then the judge would seize their wealth and forcefully make them pay back that which they are responsible for. marriage, which has been touched upon, the amanah of marriage. Today we take marriage like we're purchasing shoes. Once we're done, we can find a new pair. It doesn't work like that. It's a heavy agreement, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described. A heavy agreement. When a man gets married, he is agreeing to take care and to take responsibility for this believing woman that he's marrying. Financial responsibility, physical responsibility, emotional responsibility. Likewise, the woman is agreeing to take care of her husband. Physical needs, emotional needs, excuse me, needs of the children, and so on and so forth. If we start to take responsibility for that which we have to take responsibility for within our communities will change. It's a culture that we need to readopt. The Sahaba took their responsibility seriously. The Prophet ﷺ was known as As-Sadiqul Ameen. It's our heritage, it's our culture. And it's something that is slowly disappearing. Potentially a sign of the hour. We do not want to be from those described by the Prophet ﷺ as having their amanah taken away from them. Potentially being eventually those who leave off their salah. And I should be worried. If I don't have the ability to fulfill my responsibility, I should say, am I eventually going to leave off my salah? The salah is an amanah itself. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us from those that are able to fulfill their responsibilities. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to follow in the footsteps of the Prophet ﷺ, As-Sadiqul Ameen. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim innaka Hamidum Majid. Warda Allahumma an Abi Bakr wa an Umar wa an Uthman wa an Ali wa an sa'ir ashabati ajma'in. Allahumma tub alayna wa'afu anna wa taqabbal minna innaka mujib ad-da'awat. Allahumma ja'alna min alladhina yufuna bi'uhudihim ya Rabbil alameen. Allahumma taqabbal minna. اللهم انصر الإسلام والمسلمين في كل مكان واحفظنا وجعلنا من المقيمين للصلاة ومن ذرياتنا وأقم الصلاة.
Excuse that